Stop counting. Alex? We lost you?
You're live, Raul.
Okay, thank you very much. And Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for your presence and welcome to the first of the two geopolitical sessions that are taking place this week during the Public Policy Forum of the Africa Dialogue Series 2021. My name is Raul de Melo Cabral, and I will be chairing today's session. I am the Chief of Coordination, Advocacy and Program Development Branch in the United Nations Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, better known as OSA. OSA and its partner, the African Union and the UNESCO, have designed the geopolitical sessions as a means to give an impulse to the debate on global issues with a focus on their impact on Africa development. Today's geopolitical session will be addressing three issues: financing for development, illicit financial flows and international tax cooperation, sustaining peace for sustainable development, and human capital and building forward better after COVID-19. Now, I would like to just give very quickly some aspects of the housekeeping issues, and I would like us to note that permanent representatives in the UN entities who wish to take the floor during today's geopolitical session and have not as yet pre-registered should kindly please request to do so through the Zoom chat function, indicating their permanent mission or UN entity when doing so. Also important to note is that intervention should be, please, limited to 3 minutes in order to allow more time for the interaction. It is also important for all of us to be aware, the participants in particular, that further information on the Africa Dialogue series can be found on our website, on OSA website at www.un.org/OSA/ADS 2021. Also, online audience members who have registered may follow the session through the Zoom platform, as our USG had already referred informally. So it can be followed in our Zoom, not only in our Zoom platform, but also on the UN web TV. And that will be live as well. Interpretation is also available through the Zoom platform in English, French, Arabic, and Portuguese. And for better experience, please mute the original audio when selecting one of the interpretation languages. And should you have any problem in selecting your preferred language or in muting the original language, kindly please ensure that you have the latest version of the app, the application, or that you are using a compatible browser. Ladies and gentlemen, before handing over to the moderator of today's session, I have the distinct honor and the great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Ms. Amina Mohammed, United Nations Deputy Secretary General, who will give a keynote address. Her message is a broadcast through a pre-recorded video. Please play the video.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, when the General Assembly and the African Union respectively adopted the Agenda 2030 and the 2063 Agenda, they put ownership at the core of the development policies. In the African context, ownership has three main implications. First, taking responsibility of our present and future by creating the conditions and policy frameworks that are necessary to ensure transparency, accountability, and equality in the exercise of public service. Second, control of our own resources. As long as African countries continue to depend on others to cover basic needs, such as having access to the COVID-19 vaccines, they will not be really free to establish their own priorities and decide on their future. Third, a change of narrative that is based on Africa's reality and identity. We need to understand our past, embrace our heritage and traditions, and build on them, taking advantage of Africa's rich culture and history as the best way of finding sustainable solutions for the continent. The three issues, financing for development, sustaining peace and human capital, and the COVID recovery, that will be discussed today provide a perfect opportunity to increase African countries' ownership of their own development path. Increasing available resources for financing development is indispensable to achieve sustainable peace in Africa. Ensuring inclusivity and equality in the access of public service delivery is the most effective way to promote peace and stability on the continent. Promoting inclusive and sustainable development should continue to be prioritized in order to achieve sustainable peace in Africa. Illicit financial flows, including those linked to the extractive sector, are draining Africa's development resources. They exceed Africa's total external debt stock, making Africa a net creditor to the rest of the world. We need to bolster transparency and traceability throughout the global value chain to eradicate tax evasion and promote human rights principles. A just transition to a net zero future will require comprehensive national and international regulatory frameworks and the design and effective implementation of long-term national and regional agreements to achieve the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, including through the African Mining Vision. The COVID-19 pandemic has clearly proved that perceived inequalities and restrictions in the access to basic services can trigger conflict. It has also demonstrated that investing in health is not only fulfilling a right, but also protecting a country's most valuable resource, its human capital. But as it stands, 80% of the population in Africa has no social protection at all. As Africa gets ready for building forward better, human capital should become a cross-cutting priority to promote resilience, growth, and sustainability. To do so, we need to scale up investments made during the pandemic in order to ensure robust social protection systems are in place to deal with the next shock. The COVID-19 recovery will be dependent on the quality of the response for vaccines, investments for socioeconomic recovery, and climate action through just transitions that cover women, energy, connectivity, and food systems. This will support and enhance the vision of the continent and the implementation of the CFTA. I invite you to discuss specific proposals in these three areas and to reflect how they can contribute to strengthen Africa's ownership of its development path, leaving no nation behind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that we just heard a very important keynote address by our distinguished Deputy Secretary General. At this time, I would like to introduce the moderator of today's Geopolitical Session, Ms. Cristina Duarte, United Nations Distinguished Under-Secretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, who will guide the discussions. Madame Duarte, I have the pleasure and great honor to hand over the floor to you to conduct the proceedings from now on. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raul Cabral. Good afternoon, good evening, dear ambassadors, panelists, and dear participants and attendees. As Raul mentioned, in his introductory remarks, this geopolitical session will address three interrelated subjects: financing for development, illicit financial flows and international tax cooperation is the first one. The second, sustaining peace for sustainable development. And the third one, human capital and building forward better after COVID-19. I would like, building on the DSG's remarks, to point out a couple of issues that for me are important to see how these three subjects are interrelated. We know that illicit financial can be outflow, but also can be inflows. So illicit financial inflows have been happening in Africa in a very strong way. These illicit financial inflows, they have been feeding in a very silent way instability. This instability as a result, have been producing weak institutions. Weak institutions such as weak national revenues authority, weak natural resource management entities. With these weak institutions, we have been facing in Africa a quite strong challenge in terms of low capacity to mobilize domestic resources. And when African countries display a low capacity to mobilize those domestic resources, these same resources leave the continent as illicit financial flows. And when illicit financial flows leave the continent, the result is no fiscal space to finance development, which means no investment in human capital. So no investment in providing services, social services. And again, the deficit or the lack of providing social services have been feeding instability. And this is the reason, or this is the rationale that is behind these three subjects being together in this session. We have the honor with us as panelists that will present each of these subjects. The first one, financing for development, illicit financial flows and international tax cooperation, will be presented. The geopolitical statement will be delivered by Mr. Sofiane Minouni, permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations. The second one, sustaining peace for sustainable development. The geopolitical remarks will be delivered by Mr. Mohamed Idriss, permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations and chair of the Peace Building Commission. And the third subject, human capital and building forward better after COVID-19. The geopolitical statements will be delivered by Mr. Mohamed Siad Douale, permanent representative of Djibouti to the United Nations. Now, I have the floor, I have the pleasure, and with your permission, to give the floor to Mr. Sofiane Minouni, permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like, first of all, to thank my dear sister, USG Cristina Duarte, and her team, the OSA, for organizing the African Dialogue Series under this new and innovative format, which combines in a very smart way the technical and political dimensions of issues of the utmost importance for African. In this vein, my gratitude goes also to this morning's speakers for bringing their expert perspective on the topic at hand. My thanks goes also to Madam Deputy Secretary General, my sister Amina, for her comprehensive and informative intervention. I have the honor and the privilege to share a synthetic presentation on Africa's priority in relation with the topic of financing for development, illicit financial flow, and international tax cooperation. As enshrined in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, financing for development should be at the core of our approach to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in its entirety, including its SDGs. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic caused a deep economic and social crisis in developing countries, particularly African countries, with the disruption of global supply chains, the collapse in travel and tourism sectors, the rising unemployment, and the decline in consumer demands and financial market volatility. Against this backdrop, I believe that the international community should scale up its efforts to mobilize the necessary financial resources for development in the four following areas. First, address the issue of illicit financial flows. It is a fact that illicit financial flows, estimated by UNCTAD Economic Development Report 2020, on average of $88.6 billion annually, hinder the achievement of sustainable economic development in developing countries, particularly in Africa. Indeed, it impacts states' ability to mobilize the domestic resources needed for financing their development priorities. Therefore, combating illicit financial flows is crucial to reach our common objectives and allow us to have more resources to invest in sustainable development. The role of the international community and multilateral cooperation in this regard is crucial. Indeed, prioritizing domestic resources mobilization as one of the main sources for financing for development, as reflected in Addis Ababa Action Agenda, requires solid international cooperation, and in this vein, the international community must provide the necessary condition to achieve that objective, including by combating illicit financial flows and facilitating assets return to their countries of origin. Furthermore, strengthening the mandate and structure of the UN Tax Experts Committee is of paramount importance. There is a need to make international tax cooperation inclusive and universal, including by upgrading UN experts on international tax cooperation to a full-fledged intergovernmental tax body. The support of African countries to this endeavor is crucial, since it would promote the continent's interest by enhancing cooperation in this field and reaching a common understanding of it. In this regard, I would like to commend the report of the FACTI panel set out by the former PGA, our brother Tijani, which provided a series of recommendations aiming at addressing the gaps within the international financial system. Second area is to address the rise of debt vulnerabilities in African countries. Countries are showing signs of debt distress that could be compounded by the pandemic COVID-19. The IMF Regional Economic Outlook report for the Sub-Saharan African signaled that the number of countries at risk for moderate and high debt distress increased in the region. In this regard, 22 countries, particularly Sub-Saharan African countries, have benefited of an immediate debt. What is this? I have lost my, sorry, I thought I lost my connection. I was saying
no,
that
you can proceed. You can proceed.
I was saying that 22 countries, particularly sub-Saharan African countries, have benefited of an immediate debt service relief suspension, and 30 countries have received a financial support of $16 billion. This rise is due to increased spending necessary for combating both the health implication and the fall in economic activities under the COVID-19 pandemic. The different initiatives already taken by the UN Secretary General and the UN Deputy Secretary General to tackle this matter are welcomed, as well as the incentive measures and initiatives adopted by the IMF, the World Bank, and the G20. These measures and these initiatives need, however, to be supported by the international community as a whole to strengthen inclusive dialogues and mechanisms on sovereign debt in order to advance the discussion on debt transparency and responsible lending and borrowing and the rule of engagement, including with the private sector. Third area is related to the domestic finance. We should focus on domestic finance by increasing government revenues and developing domestic financial and capital markets, including through innovative financing. In this regard, I should highlight that Africa has a long way to go in domestic resource mobilization compared to other developing regions in the world. Tax revenues across the continent are expected to deteriorate further on account of the COVID-19 pandemic, jeopardizing the implementation of the 2030 and the 2063 agendas. According to the World Bank, COVID-19 lockdowns have triggered the first continent-wide recession in 25 years, costing Africa an estimated $115 billion in lost output and pushing up to 40 million additional people into extreme poverty. Therefore, we need to reinforce the transparency of the fiscal system in combating inequality and recommit the strengthening the capacity of revenue administration through modernized progressive tax system, investing in tackling tax evasion and tax avoidance, fighting money laundering, and supporting local capacity building, including improving domestic institutions, strengthening governance, and enhancing fiscal capacity development. Lastly, increase the official development assistance to help African countries. I would like in this regard to reiterate the call made to developed countries to meet their respective global commitments in terms of ODA, particularly as we now have to take bolder steps to recommit to the Addis Ababa Action Agenda to build forward better. Donor countries have to respect their commitment to stable and predictable funding to development cooperation. In the same vein, all development partners should align their ODA support with the priority of recipient countries as identified in the National Sustainable Development Strategies and integrated national financing frameworks of developing countries. To conclude, Madam Moderator, as the world strives to overcome the COVID-19 crisis and build back better to be on track of achieving the SDGs, let me reiterate Algeria's commitment and strong support to the efforts, including those of the Secretary General, to build more equal inclusive, and sustainable economies and societies that are more resilient to face the current global challenges. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear brother Sofiane, permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, for such clear, well-structured, and I use say straight to the point of your remarks. Allow me now I move forward to the second geopolitical statement, and I have the pleasure to give the floor to my dear brother, Mr. Mohamed Idris, permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations and chair of the Peace Building Commission. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, distinguished USG Cristina Duarte, my dear sister. And thank you, my dear brother Raul. And of course, my welcome and appreciation to the DSG and her valuable remarks, and my dear brothers, Ambassador Sofiane and Ambassador Mohammed. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, brothers and sisters, happy Africa Day and happy Africa Dialogue Series. At the outset, I would like to pay tribute to USG Cristina Duarte and her team in the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa for convening this important interactive public policy forum that offers a valuable opportunity to debate about challenges and opportunities for Africa. It is also a pleasure being among the distinguished speakers and participants of this session. As highlighted in the program, I will focus my intervention on sustaining peace for sustainable development. I will begin by reiterating a phrase we often say and repeat, but yet to be concretized on the ground, which is, there is no peace without development, there is no development without peace. The Aswan Forum for Sustainable Development, for Sustainable Peace and Development, which is an annual forum owned by Africa and was launched during Egypt's chairmanship of the African Union in 2019, has been an important step in that direction, as it seeks to operationalize the peace development nexus by championing African solutions to African problems, including through strengthening the links between policy and practice. The discussions in the Aswan Forum over the past 2 years have shown that for this to be achieved, there is an urgent need for a paradigm shift from crisis management to conflict prevention, anchored in a national and continental vision and ownership of the development and peace agendas. This would unleash the full potential of existing frameworks and leverage the complementarity mandates, resources, and expertise of available institutional structures and mechanisms. It would ensure that operationalization of the peace development nexus, one, is proactive rather than reactive. Second, breaks silos and achieves integration, coherence, and coordination of actions of various actors on the national, regional, and international levels. And three, embraces complexity rather than simplifies it in the planning, design, and implementation of operational engagements, programs, and projects. Excellencies, brothers and sisters, the United Nations has a pivotal role to play in accompanying the African continent in its path towards sustainable peace and development. The UN Peacebuilding Commission is well positioned through its unique convening, bridging, and advisory roles to lead efforts aiming at enhancing the effectiveness of sustaining peace activities in Africa through mobilization of international support and attention, as well as coordinating and aligning international support with the continent's peace-building needs and priorities. In this context, as an African chairmanship of the PBC, Egypt remains fully committed to ensure that the UN peacebuilding architecture's engagement, both whether through the PBC and the PBF, that this engagement in support of peacebuilding and sustaining peace in Africa will continue to receive the requisite attention, as the continent occupies almost 80% of the PBC agenda. In this connection, allow me to share with you some highlights on the progress achieved and the way forward. First, in fulfilling its advisory role, the PBC continues to advise the Security Council, General Assembly, and ECOSOC on African matters under its consideration. Most recently, the PBC advised the General Assembly on the latter's resolution on causes of conflict and the promotion of durable peace and sustainable development in Africa, on practical means for the UN system and the African Union collaborate in support of the AU's evolving effort and ownership of its sustaining peace efforts. And I have to say that in this vein, there was a lot of cooperation between the PBC and the OSA in this matter. Second, we must continue to leverage the PBC's role to promote and expand partnerships with regional and sub-regional organizations, as well as international financial institutions, with a view to ensure more efficiency and coherence in support of peacebuilding efforts. Earlier this year, the PBC partnered with WTO and joined the Trade for Peace, T4P network, which is meant to assist conflict-affected countries in the accession process to the WTO. Moreover, we are exploring ways to better utilize the annual joint meeting between the PBC and the AU Peace and Security Council to advance the AU-UN strategic partnership in peacebuilding and sustaining peace at both strategic and operational levels. Third, it's important to continue to enhance the overall performance of the UN system in delivering on peacebuilding and sustaining peace, taking into account the impact of UN reforms, which should advance a more coherent and effective actions. Fourth, the world is still grappling with the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. The 2020 twin resolutions on the review of the UN peacebuilding architecture recognized that progress towards achieving the SDGs could be hampered and peacebuilding and development gains reversed, and emphasized that the need to integrate peacebuilding and sustaining peace into efforts to build back better. The PBC, as it was the first to quickly respond to the pandemic, will continue to play its role in mobilizing support for recovery efforts in countries under its consideration. Last but not least, ensuring adequate, predictable, and sustained financing for peacebuilding is critical for the ability and effectiveness of peacebuilding efforts. Financing remains the most critical challenge facing the UN peacebuilding architecture. Member states must continue to explore options to realize that objective, to be submitted to the high-level GA meeting next session on financing the peacebuilding architecture. The PBC will continue to convene relevant stakeholders to generate action-oriented recommendations to that end. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Mr. Mohamed Idris, the permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations, for such important remarks regarding sustaining peace for a sustainable development. Thank you very much. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor, my dear brother, Mr. Mohamed Siad Douele, permanent representative of Djibouti to the United Nations. Please, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais d'abord remercier Madame Amina Mohamed, UN Deputy Secretary General pour son allocution. Mes remerciements vont à votre endroit, Madame Duarte, et je voudrais vous féliciter pour votre contribution pour l'Afrique, pour le développement de l'Afrique et pour l'organisation de ce Dialogue Series qui est déjà un succès. Je voudrais aussi remercier et saluer mes distingués co-panélistes, mes frères Sofiane de l'Égypte, de l'Algérie et Mohamed Idriss de l'Égypte. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs et distingués collègues, bon après-midi. De prime abord, je voudrais dire combien honoré je suis de participer à cette importante conversation sur un thème central pour le développement de l'Afrique. Je souhaiterais également rendre un hommage vibrant à l'ensemble de penseurs, économistes, sociologues, historiens et professionnels de l'éducation du continent, originaires du continent, qui ont fait un séjour ininterrompu sur les questions liées au développement du capital humain et l'éducation en Afrique, convaincus qu'ils étaient qu'une Afrique bien développée est tributaire de l'éducation et des compétences des Africains, notamment de la jeunesse. Je pense en particulier à l'ouvrage de feu Kizerbo, Éduquer ou périr, ainsi que le puissant ouvrage de même auteur, À quand l'Afrique, qui trahit l'impatience que nous ressentons tous et l'urgence qu'il y a à développer le capital humain en Afrique afin qu'il joue un rôle de premier plan et réalise tout son potentiel. Nous exprimons également notre profonde gratitude aux chefs d'État et de gouvernement africains qui, lors du sommet de 2017, ont consacré l'essentiel de leurs débats et réflexions au thème « Tirer pleinement profit de dividendes démographiques en investissant dans la jeunesse ». À l'issue du sommet, les chefs d'État ont unanimement adopté une feuille de route énonçant les mesures et actions urgentes à mener pour transformer son actif démographique en dividendes économiques. Bien sûr, le double choc sanitaire et économique généré par la pandémie du Covid-19 a remis en cause beaucoup des gains obtenus, mais l'Afrique, continent qui tout au long de son histoire a été constamment soumis au diktat de l'adaptation, est conscient qu'il lui faut tout mettre en œuvre afin de poursuivre son action pour réaliser son potentiel par le biais du capital humain, c'est-à-dire la santé, les connaissances, les compétences et la résilience des populations du continent. Dans une présentation que nous voudrions synthétique et ramassée, nous aborderons les 3 points suivants, en anglais cette fois-ci. The first one being the key issues and trends. The second one would be the opportunities, and the third and last would be the measures and recommendations that we deem important to be implemented. First, on the key issues and trends. Africa is a continent with remarkable economic potential, yet the least developed, in part due to its inadequate human capital to transform this potential into social and economic development. According to the World Bank's Human Capital Index, African countries rank at the bottom. Africa's Human Capital Index score is 0.4 compared to a global average of 0.57. Sub-Saharan Africa currently only captures 55% of its human capital potential compared to a global average of 65%. And this is concerning. Africa's human capital has, of course, been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Before the pandemic hit, the UN Sustainable Development Goal to eliminate extreme poverty by 2030 was already out of reach. In spite of the pandemic, the World Bank notes that African countries have made tremendous investment in the last year to keep their economies afloat and protect the lives and livelihoods of their people. Growth in the region is forecast to rise between 2.3 and 3.4% in 2021, depending on the policies adopted by countries and the international community. Real GDP growth for 2021 is estimated at 3.1%. However, it is predicated that for most countries in the region, activity will remain well below the pre-COVID-19 projections at the end of 2021, increasing the risk of long-lasting damage from the pandemic on people's living standards. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, poverty and inequalities continue to have striking effects on youth and women. The labor market, marked by rising skills mismatch, low productivity in the informal sector, unemployment and underemployment against a rising youth population set to reach more than 1 billion by 2050, reflects a generation at risk. Africa records the world's lowest school enrollment and quality, leaving over 90 million teenagers struggling for employment in low-paid, informal sector jobs. This, coupled with the mixed effects of limited access to health, nutrition, technology, and innovation, are strong warning signals to sustaining Africa's growth. So, though job and wage losses have been widespread and the COVID-related economic restrictions, women and girls remain the most vulnerable. The pandemic has also exposed the profound vulnerability of communities affected by fragility, conflict, or violence, compelling a catch-up in investment in their human capital. Now on the opportunities. COVID-19 crisis underscores the need to protect and bolster human capital in the overarching effort to save lives, promote well-being, and safeguard future productivity. The African Union 2021 theme, Arts, Culture, and Heritage, Levers for Building the Africa We Want, is inspired by Agenda 2063 and Aspiration 5, which believe that in Africa with a strong cultural identity, values and ethics will strengthen it. The aspiration focuses on the work ethic, the role of women and youth, and recognizes traditional and religious leaders as agents of change. The transformative power of culture and heritage for human capital development, either in education, health, social protection, and inclusion and job creation, has been increasingly recognized as a critical enabler for sustainable development. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted important roles that African culture and heritage play in promoting human capital. At the global level, the Culture 2030 Indicators Framework, developed by UNESCO, represents an important initiative to complement the global indicators agreed upon within the UN 2030 Agenda to measure the contribution of culture and cultural heritage to the creation of an enabling environment for SDGs implementation on human capital development. Furthermore, at the regional level, the AU Agenda 2063, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance, the revised AU Plan of Action on Cultural and Creative Industries, and the Statute of the African Audiovisual and Cinema Commission provide the policy guidance in promoting the contribution of culture and heritage to the integration of society to the socioeconomic development, including through human capital development. With the right policies and implementation plans, the post-COVID recovery may present Africa with the opportunity to benefit from its large human capital endowment. Now, third and last point, some measures and recommendations. The following recommendations have been identified as game changers that need to be prioritized to accelerate human capital development in building forward better after the COVID-19. First, increasing allocation and efficiency of spending on human capital. Reducing countries' debt burdens will release resources for public investment, including investment in human capital in areas such as education, health, and infrastructure. Investments in human capital will help lower the risk of long-lasting damage from the pandemic, which may become apparent over the longer term and can enhance competitiveness and productivity. Increasing allocation and efficiency of spending on human capital is needed to achieve results. Domestic resource mobilization, private sector engagement, and better use of development assistance must be coupled with efforts to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of spending through policy reforms and a focus on value for money. The United Nations has underscored that the pandemic is an opportunity to shift from a charity-based approach to one that puts human capital at the heart of post-pandemic recovery and sustainable economic growth. While helpful, Aid will not be enough to fill human capital investment gaps in health in post-COVID. African countries' previous commitments to strengthening their health sector in the 2001 Abuja Declaration to allocate no less than 15% of the annual budget to the health sector should be reinforced. Also, this includes the Addis Ababa Call to Action initiative launched in February 2019 by member states, aimed at increasing commitments for health by improving the impact of spending and ensuring the achievement of universal health coverage. Engagement in women and youth. African women and girls have played a critical role in responding to COVID-19, including as frontline health care workers, caregivers at home and at work, and as mobilizers in their community. Given both their vulnerability and frontline roles during the pandemic, women must be at the center of the post-COVID-19 recovery and reconstruction. Women are also central to achieve each and every one of the 17 SDGs and the 7 aspirations of the AU Agenda 2063 in building a prosperous, resilient future. Therefore, empowering women and girls as agents of socioeconomic change is fundamental to realizing human capital gains and building forward better. There's also need to enhance existing and develop new innovation and collaboration initiatives among member states and other key stakeholders with the youth. For instance, there is need to support existing initiatives such as the AU African Youth Front on Coronavirus, which is a multi-stakeholder youth advocacy group, which has played a pivotal role in the response effort to the pandemic on the continent. Leveraging technology and innovation, it is estimated that 70% of African youth are offline, though technology is one of the key drivers for human capital development. There is need to increase national budgeting especially for offline youth in fulfilling the commitment of the AU Continental Education Strategy for Africa 2016-2025 and the AU African Strategy for Digital Transformation 2020-2030. Policy reforms addressing digital infrastructure gaps, affordability of devices and services, and digital literacy play a key role in expanding access to digital technologies and closing the digital divide across gender, thereby boosting human capital. Building back better will require African countries to increase domestic spending on science, technology, and innovation, and aggressively expand STI partnership. Success in this area will place African countries in a very good position to successfully confront the next pandemic. Public health. Member states and development partners must reorient health system to target diseases across the life cycle that have the greatest measurable impact on mortality and human capital development. Public health interventions to safeguard lives and livelihoods should remain a priority. Partnership engagement. African government should existing partnership with diaspora communities and consider collaborations in building forward better after the COVID-19 by emphasizing more sustainable modes of engaging in development. Public-private partnership in the post-COVID-19 recovery should be enhanced in order to fill investment gaps that arise due to a lack of enough resources to finance the recovery of African economies. There is urgent need for African governments and development partners to invest in human and institutional capacity and support policy dialogue and formulation in line with building strong and resilient economies in post-COVID-19 across the continent. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much for such insightful remarks regarding human capital and building forward better after COVID-19, dear ambassador. Before opening the floor for other geopolitical statements or remarks, allow me just to extract the most important, based on my opinion, the most important issues that this three strong geopolitical statements just brought to our session. Regarding financing for development, the first issue was clear. Africa has a clear agenda, a clear vision regarding financing for development. And this is clear stated in the Agenda 2063, but more in the Agenda 2015. And Agenda 2015 is the core of this issue. Second is illicit financial flows. Has been here considered that illicit financial flows requires international tax cooperation and consequently a mutual accountability framework. If this is true, international tax cooperation should incorporate principles such as being inclusive and universal, and calling for a global collective framework. We cannot talk about financing for development and illicit financial flows without not touching, as our dear Ambassador Sofiane did, debt distress versus illicit financial flows. We might be facing a paradox. And only by addressing these financing issues, financing for development issues, we can start visualizing, strategizing, recovering better after COVID-19. And when addressing COVID-19, recovering better after COVID-19, domestic resource mobilization just emerged as a driver of the process. We are talking about revenue national authorities. You are talking about national capital markets that leverage transparency on public administration. The last issue, but not the least, is the role of ODA. ODA, first a call to this compromise, international compromise, but also ODA to be used, to be channeled for institutional building. SDG 16 plays an important role in the financing for development. Then we move to our second issue, sustaining peace for sustainable development. No peace, no development. No development, no peace. That was stated in a very clear way. If this is the case, then we should address nexus in a very strategic way. And here has been proposed a more proactive approach regarding nexus, understanding better the interdependence within nexus, breaking the silos and working towards integration of all the elements that are the pieces of this nexus approach. We should embrace complexity by redesigning, reconceptualizing this approach. And peace in Africa, at the end of the day, is a global issue. At the end of the day, is a global issue, making us facing again a mutual accountability scenario. Then, has been raised in a very strong way the role of Peace Building Commission, the advisory role, a role also that should be on promoting partnerships, but from a strategic standpoint, standpoint. And of course, has been here underscored UN's United Nations performance in terms of peace building. Only by addressing all these issues, you'll be able to mitigate risks when delivering sustainable development goals. The last was sustainable financing, a key issue for peace building. And when we address sustainable financing in a peace building framework, we need to have our mindset prepared for innovative solutions. Then we move to human capital. Has been clear stated here by the last geopolitical statement that human capital needs to be at the center of policymaking in Africa. Has been here said that human capital policy making should be able to leverage the demographic dividend. We need to be able to translate this demographic dividend in value. We need to be able to translate this demographic dividend in economic growth, but economic growth that delivers inclusive development. Then we move to highlighting the key issues and trends. And indeed, Sub-Saharan Africa, for example, currently, as Ambassador Douale mentioned, only captures 55% of its human capital potential, against an average of 65%. This figure is a quite important one. But then, has been here mentioned, that the need to increase allocation and efficiency of spending on human capital, the only way to address demographic dividend. If we do not invest in human capital, we will not be able to address demographic dividend. And last, the role of ODA. ODA can play here an important role in terms of addressing the unleashing potential of human capital in Africa, so we can tackle or we can grab the demographic dividend opportunity. Having said that, I think these are the main ideas. Thank you very much for such insightful interventions, for such insightful geopolitical statements. And now I have the pleasure to open the floor. And the first pre-registered speaker is Ambassador Kinioro Ishikane from Japan. Ambassador, you have the floor. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, do you hear me?
Very well.
Okay, great.
Can you just speak a little bit louder?
Yes, I will. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, dear Duarte. I think most of the things has been said by my dear colleague ambassadors and yourself, Duarte. But just let me say a few words, from the viewpoint of Japan. Well, first, I thank, also the AU and the UNESCO for organizing this year's ADS and for reuniting us in support of Africa overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic and its negative impacts. First and foremost, we must address the urgent need to end the lingering effects of pandemic in Africa by ensuring, equitable access to vaccines. So in this connection, Japan will co-host the COVAX Advanced Market Commitment Summit with Gavi next week. Japan will do its utmost to make further contributions in addition to the $200 million already dispersed. In the meantime, Japan is supporting the African countries to strengthen vaccine delivery and inoculation systems through the Last 1 Mile Support Initiative with a view to realizing universal health coverage. Second, to alleviate the socioeconomic burden on African countries, we need to, take holistic approaches, breaking silos, as someone just put it, placing people at center and considering multidimensional aspects of the challenges we are facing. Yes, cooperation to fight against illicit financial flows should be intensified. Yes, we need to keep on, providing ODA, which continues to play an important role. But also we need to think about how we can best bring, bring in the private sector, the private resources into play in the African continent. And we reiterate the need for all public and private sector creditors to participate in debt relief measures in a transparent manner. The G20 common framework could be instrumental in helping those countries. And third, we must continue to work on peace building. So in that regard, we highly recommend the work of Peace Building Commission chaired by my dear colleague Mohammed Idris. So we continue to invest in institution building in this regard and human capacity building, which are keys to strengthening Africa's ownership and living out, quote, African solution to African problems, unquote. In this regard, NAPSA, a new approach for peace and stability in Africa, an initiative we launched at TICAD 2019, assist in strengthening governmental, administrative, judicial, and legislative systems. Also at TICAD 7, Japan committed to inviting 3,000 young African students to Japan over 6 years. And furthermore, well, in partnership with ITU and Saudi Arabia, Japan has started what we call a Connect to Recover initiative in Africa, aiming to reinforce digital infrastructures and ecosystems and support the digital transformation in the areas of digital finance, e-education, e-health, e-government, and teleworking. Well, lastly, about the theme of this year's Africa Dialogue Series, culture, identity, and ownership. The theme is about culture, but it goes, of course, far beyond culture. The culture, through enhancing identity, can be uniting power of the community and will enormously contribute to the stability of the community. Culture can be source of economic development through tourism. But more than that, sense of ownership nurtured by culture is the basis of economic development. But culture can be also a source of conflict if tolerance toward difference does not exist. Well, Japan joined hands with African friends to promote Africa's diverse cultural heritage. We will host an online event together with the Permanent Mission of Tunisia and the TICAD co-organizers entitled Boosting Africa's Transformative Power of Tourism, Harnessing Technology and Innovation, Youth and Women Entrepreneurship on June 21st. Allow me finally to mention TICAD 8 to be held next year in Tunisia. We look forward to furthering our partnership with Africa towards TICAD 8, co-organized with the government of Tunisia, OSA, AU, UNDP, and the World Bank. I thank you.
Thank you, dear Ambassador Ishikane. I'd like just to bring one thing that you mentioned, and I believe that is really important for Africa: private sector investments. The challenges are so huge that it's a necessity that public finance and private finance get together and address African challenge, national, regional, but globally. Thank you very much. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Sheikh Miang from Senegal. Please, you have the floor. Ambassador Sheikh Miang from Senegal. I think we need to move on because he's not taking the floor. If he requests again, it will be my pleasure to give him the floor. And now I have the pleasure to give the floor to the deputy representative of Italy, Stefano Stefanile.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me say that we appreciated very much the video message by the Deputy Secretary General, and of course also the very comprehensive interventions by the PRs of Algeria, Egypt, and Djibouti, and of course your subsequent remarks at the end of these interventions. Let me also say that I'm particularly pleased to be part of this conversation. We really welcome these Africa dialogues. It's an excellent initiative that we fully support and in which we have always taken part so far with enthusiasm. Yesterday, the Africa Day was widely celebrated in Italy and all over the world, not only through government-promoted initiatives in our case, but also with events organized by our parliament and civil society organizations. So we may say, in other words, that it was a real whole-of-country celebration. Now, this year, the overarching theme of this dialogue is about arts, culture, and heritage. And culture is indeed one of the main elements that characterizes the special partnership that unites Italy with Africa. The others are geography, history, and of course, economic relations, being Italy one of the largest investors in Africa in terms of foreign direct investments, and also one of the main partners of Africa in terms of socio-economic development. Now, we all know that particularly as the continent strives to meet the challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, to help Africa overcome its challenges, it is crucial first and foremost to support Africa in the vaccination campaign. And as announced last week at the Global Health Summit co-hosted by Italy and the European Commission, Italy will finance the COVAX facility with additional 300 million euros and with 15 million doses of vaccine. And we hope that this will translate into direct support to as many African countries as possible. At the same time, Italy is making of the support to the most vulnerable countries, including African countries, a real priority of its presidency of the G20. We have been working very hard with our G20 partners to ensure adequate and effective fiscal and financial measures to support the global economy and the most vulnerable countries, especially in Africa. And the key milestones delivered so far are the extension of the debt service suspension initiative until the end of 2021. This was already recalled in a previous intervention. The progress made on the implementation of the common framework for debt treatment and the consensus on a new special drawing rights general allocation of $650 billion by the IMF. The G20 also supported the key decision for an anticipated IDA replenishment by the World Bank. Now, supporting a better recovery of the African continent is also going to be one of the two major priorities in the agenda of the G20 Foreign Affairs and Development Ministerial meeting that is scheduled for the end of June in Matera in Italy. One word on international tax cooperation, just to say that Italy last year decided to double its financial engagement, raising its overall contribution to $1.2 million to the Addis Ababa tax initiative, which is, as you know, a multi-stakeholder partnership aiming to fostering domestic revenue mobilization with the objective of creating tax systems that can work for people and advance the implementation of the SDGs. In connection with the ATI, the OECD, Kenya, Italy, and Germany launched in 2017 the Africa Academy for Tax and Financial Crime Investigation, which is located in Nairobi and which seeks to strengthen the capacity of tax and financial crime African investigators in tackling illicit financial flows. And this was one of the highlight in the intervention of one of the permanent representatives at the beginning. Another consideration that is also connected to the area of discussion of today's meeting is the importance of investing in human capital. We strongly believe that this is a long-term investment, but an unavoidable one to create adequate conditions of growth for the African economy. And there could be no effective plan for the sustainable development of Africa without adequate investment in the extraordinary human capital factor across the whole African continent. Last but not least, let me just recall that in October this year, Italy will also host the biannual Italy-Africa Conference. And this year, in consideration of our role together with the UK in the preparation for COP26, we will devote this ministerial event entitled Encounters with Africa to climate challenges and sustainable development in Africa. And we think this is a timely moment to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Allow me to underscore three important issues out of your, let's say, remark. The vaccination support. Thank you very much, because we're still displaying in Africa very low ratios of coverage. Second, illicit financial flows, the need to address it as a global issue, and it's important that a country from the developed world embraces this approach. And the last one, human capital as a key success factor in terms of policy making and in terms of delivering development in Africa. Now, it seems that my dear brother, Mr. Ambassador Sheikh Miang, is back in the room.
Yes.
Thank you. So you have the floor.
Thank you very much, my dear sister. Sorry for the technical glitches. First of all, we'd like to congratulate you and your team for organizing this event, and also for the choice of the very relevant themes under consideration, which in my opinion epitomize some of the main challenges which Africa really faces. Having said that, I would like also to brief some comments on each of the themes, but very briefly, following the brilliant presentations of my brothers and friends, Sofian, Idris, and Mohammed. From the outset, we all agree that illicit financial flows are a curse to our continent and gravely impair the financing of its development. Tax havens have created a tax hell in Africa. The colossal losses are well established, and I will not go back over them. Rather, I will concentrate on the ways and means to tackle this phenomenon. And these are my thoughts. And I can see 4 priorities. The first priority is that the restitution of stolen assets from African countries must be a foremost priority. As such, the authorities of the safe haven countries must be led to impose criminal and financial sanctions on the financial institutions that receive and use these assets. Similarly, individuals and organizations that facilitate corruption and bribery must be monitored and held accountable. The second priority is that we need to enhance international cooperation in 2 fields. One is in the field of tax policy, such as taxation of the digital economy, financial reporting and information exchange, data production and publication. And the other one is dispute resolution, tax dispute resolution, like international tax dispute resolution, non-judicial resolutions, foreign compensations, confiscations, restitutions, and disposals of assets. I think we need to have that cooperation, international cooperation at those 2 levels. The third priority is that we must make sure that regional initiatives, such as the African Common Position on Asset Recovery, which is called CAPAR, adopted by the 33rd African Union Summit, and also what we call ALFS, which is the African Legal Support Facility, under the auspices of the AFDB. They should be firmly supported. And in this regard, the African Union should take the lead. The fourth priority is that we need to make sure that we establish a continent-wide tax body, which would help us to better combat capital flight, since there is no universal tax convention to date. However, IFFs are only one aspect of our development challenges. Africa must invest in economic development, in productive forces, especially in diversifying its economy, which can generate additional savings and broaden its tax base. This is what makes it possible to maintain public spending in social areas in a sustainable way. This brings me to my second point. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that much remains to be done on human capital. Few healthcare facilities have been identified in Africa. There are so few facilities in our continent. The ratio is 2 doctors per 10,000 people, a very low ratio compared to the world average, which is 14 per 10,000. And this is all the more worrying as the WHO predicts that non-communicable diseases will increase by 27% in Africa over the next 10 years, which could result in an additional 28 million deaths. Fortunately, Africa, many say, is not very well impacted by the pandemic as badly as the rest of the world. But I don't think we can call it success, since only 2% of the African population is vaccinated. The rate is very low, due to a large part to our wait-and-see attitude to vaccine donors. Whereas on a continental scale, we can and we must have laboratories capable of producing that. This is why it is imperative to invest more in education and STI. Thirdly, and finally, we need to invest in sustainable peace, which calls for the imperative to address the problems of underdevelopment as related to conflict in our continent. A question we should ask ourselves is, how did Africa, which at one point in history was a haven of peace, has now become a concentration of conflicts? And here, one potent instrument comes to my mind to solve all the many ills we have in Africa. And that potent instrument and word is justice. Justice is what Africa needs at home and its relations with its partners. Justice is a prerequisite for peace. But justice is not only the institution where the law is stated and where the wrong is redressed. Justice means fair access to resources. It also means the equal redistribution of wealth. It means the elimination of disparities between rural and urban areas, between genders, and between ages. Justice is about creating structural and resilient infrastructure. It's about enabling everyone to have free access to education, health, food, and decent housing. Justice is about creating sustainable economic conditions for the development of all. It is about preventing corruption in IFFs. It is good governance. It is about building and maintaining peace in a sustainable way. So I'm going to stop here because I believe that the stage is already set with the wonderful contribution we have already heard. And I will conclude by saying this, that we must also learn to clearly identify ourselves, our problems, and strive to solve ourselves, our problems, before opening up international solidarity. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear Ambassador, dear brother, Sheikh Miang. You raised important issues. Let me just, in a very quick way, illicit financial.
Christina, you muted yourself.
No, I didn't touch. Yes. So as I was saying, international tax cooperation, and this requires to embrace in a very strong way digital economy. So illicit financial flows, international tax cooperation, international tax dispute linked, and you did it very well, linked to the digital divide. Because there is no way that we are going to address all these issues if we do not embrace the ICT, if we do not embrace technology. Second, human capital. 2 doctors per 10,000 versus 14 doctors per 10,000. Only 2% has been vaccinated. So we are facing here a vaccine divide that at the end of the day, as based on your numbers, there is a health divide. The health divide, nowadays, the dress is a vaccine divide. That maybe is coming from a chain of divides. As I mentioned in my remarks this morning, there is energy divide. There is a vaccine divide. And it seems that also a health divide. The last one, sustainable peace. And you underscore very well, justice. Peace requires justice. But from an economic standpoint, fair access to resources. From a social standpoint, access to social service, access to public goods, and towards building resilience. So justice, economic dimension, social dimensions to build resilience. Thank you very much. And now I would like to give the floor to Mrs. Reuven, the director in New York of UNHCR.
Thank you very much, Christina. Thanks for organizing this incredibly significant event and for granting me the floor. Christina, it's very hard to talk about human capital and building forward better and sustaining peace for development without referring to the situation of the displaced on the African continent. That 27 million people who are displaced in Africa right now, even as we speak, that's 10 times that's 3 times the number from 10 years ago. And 1.5 million people continue to be displaced every single year on the continent. So the African demographic dividend that should be accelerating or contributing to accelerating economic growth is in fact being diverted because of conflict and climate-induced displacement. And to harness this potential, it's absolutely imperative that we look at the root causes and address them. The fragility, the fragile governance, or the instability that triggers this displacement. And to add to this litany of woes, humanitarian programs and humanitarian appeals on the African continent are egregiously underfunded. And refugees and IDPs tend to be and continue to be excluded from national development plans and frameworks. But all is not completely negative. I mean, there are some positive examples, like in Uganda, where refugees are allowed to work and live freely in the country and contribute to the economy of Uganda. In Kenya, we have the World Bank, UNHCR, and the Kenyan authorities contributing to developing a social and economic development program that helps not just the refugees, but also the host communities in Kenya as well. So these are, I think, positive examples that can be replicated elsewhere on the continent as well. We understand that this takes resources, and of course we stand ready not just to contribute ourselves, but to mobilize resources from donors and from international financial institutions like the World Bank and like the regional banks as well. And just perhaps to conclude, 2 recommendations going forward, Christina. One is it's absolutely imperative that the African Union and the national governments prioritize addressing root causes of displacement if this continent is to move forward. And the second is that we really need to adopt a development approach and promote local solutions and local integrations for the problem of displacement in Africa. In other words, allowing refugees to live and work with the host community, to become self-reliant, to contribute to the economy, and to be able to live without fear of exploitation and discrimination in the host communities where they live. Thank you.
Thank you, Reuven. A strong statement. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to stress, underscore 3 issues. Yes, indeed, displaced and refugees are number 1 issue when addressing human capital, because you are addressing people that, in my opinion, they are much more than vulnerable. This is people that have been completely deprived for the basic things, which is they don't have a space, and the space is the starting of our lives. Thank you for saying in a very strong way. And of course, I would like to underscore your 2 recommendations. Yes, root causes. And this first recommendation is linked to the second one. When you address root causes, you are ready to adopt a development approach, a long-term approach to these problems. Thank you very much. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Sierra Leone. Victoria Shimani is the Deputy Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone. She just wrote wonderful comments and strong comments on the chat box. I would like to invite you to take the floor. Please, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Moderator, for the opportunity to speak. I was wondering if I will have it because we did not pre-register to speak at this event, but I must commend the keynote speaker, the DSG, and the panelists for their insightful comments. I don't see myself on camera. I don't know what is wrong with my camera, but I think you can hear me loud and clear. I'm just going to narrow my own intervention this afternoon on the issue of financing for development, illicit financial flows, and international tax cooperation, as presented by the Ambassador of Algeria. By way of initial comments, we want to Sierra Leone expresses deep concern that trillions of dollars flow out of our countries because of illicit financial flows. So we believe this is a clear call that we must work collectively as a continent to combat this scourge. And also we see the need to strengthen good practice on asset returns as an integral part of the global effort to finance the recovery or our recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the AU Agenda 2030. No need for me to underscore or to point out how much we have lost as a result of this pandemic, ranging from normal functioning of open markets to the disruption of global supply chains, chain connectivity, and the flow of essential goods and services. So therefore, supporting and strengthening multilateral trade systems should be at the core of the recovery of international trade. I want to move quickly because the intervention is quite long. I don't want to take too much of your time, but what I am sharing this afternoon is how we can reshape our mindset on combating this scourge of illicit financial flows. So first and foremost, we believe that we need more detailed roadmap on how to address the shortfalls in global governance on taxation. And also, we believe that it is required for most of our countries, especially a country like Sierra Leone, that has financing options on public financial management and private sector development and investment to, we need a more detailed roadmap on how to address the shortfalls in global governance on taxation, which we believe is required, especially for countries like Sierra Leone with financial options on public financial management and private sector development and investment. Illicit financial flows remains a leading dimension to our financing challenge. So it is our view that illicit financial flows to be part of the broader fight against corruption that is central in our government development strategy in unleashing our financing need. Therefore, given the density surrounding these flows with an overly broad international dimension, African LDC governments such as Sierra Leone do not possess adequate capacity to overcome them. This requires constant leveraging of strengthened international development cooperation, with the UN expected to provide continued common platform, such as the factile panel for engagement in this regard. We call on all to scale up efforts at supporting African countries to improve their capacity to prevent, detect, and combat illicit financial flows and strengthen good practices on asset return to foster sustainable development and the required support to increase domestic resource mobilization, at the center of which is the fight against corruption and curbing illicit financial flow. We also need strong political will and engagement both at the national and international levels to address the concerns of illicit financial flows and asset recovery. In this regard, our African leaders need to recommit strengthening the relevant institutions in order to prevent and combat illicit financial flows. Likewise, there is need for capacity building and exchange of information, including the sharing of experiences as crucial elements in the fight against illicit financial flow. To conclude, my delegation hopes that this discussion today will lead up to concrete action to strengthen our resolve of the need to deepen commitment in combating this scourge and strengthen good practices on asset return, scaling up aid for trade and domestic resource mobilization to enhance sustainable development for all of our countries. I thank you for giving me the floor once again.
Victoria? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You raised so many issues, but I would like just allow me just to stress two. To address illicit financial flows, we need to do it from inside, from Africa, despite being a global issue. And in order to do that, there is a precondition: reshaping mindsets. Thank you for saying in a such clear way. Second, a very pragmatic issue, but important one. In order to address illicit financial flows, we do need a roadmap that in a very clear way lays down all the issues that need to be tackled from a taxation standpoint, And believe me, and this second issue is a really important one. Allow me to say, when I was Minister of Finance of Cape Verde, this is what exactly I did. I did my roadmap. For example, one of the things that was in my roadmap that I put it simply, I just canceled in Cape Verde was exemptions, fiscal exemptions. There were just 0 taxes given to everybody, and is a quite inefficiency way of delivering policy making for development. So you do need a roadmap from a taxation standpoint, from a fiscal policy standpoint, to tackle all these all these issues. Thank you very much. I don't know if someone from the panelists would like to address the floor. I'm asking to the panelists, because as you know, we have panelists and attendees. Anyone? If not, allow me to end as I start. First, thanking all the interventions, starting from the panelists, ambassador from Algeria, ambassador from Egypt, and ambassador from Djibouti. Thank you very much for your clear, to the point remarks. Second, I would like to thank our dear ambassadors from Japan, Senegal, the deputy representative from Italy, the deputy representative from Sierra Leone, and the director of HCR in New York. Thank you for your short but to the point remarks. And I do believe that our debate, our session, has laid down very well what I said at the beginning. Illicit financial inflows into Africa feed instability. This instability, the result is to weaken institutions. We have a quite delicate problem in terms of national revenues authorities and natural resource management entities. So no capacity to mobilize domestic resources. This lack of capacity to mobilize domestic resources is just one side of the coin. When you turn the coin, you see illicit financial flows at the other side of the coin. And this is basically translated no fiscal space to finance development, and meaning no fiscal space to finance peace. As my dear brother, it is mentioned very well, sustainable financing for building peace. And the need to invest in human capital through a strong delivery of services. And when addressing human capital, we need to include displaced. We need to include refugees as part of our society. And only by doing that, you are investing in human capital development, but we'll be also delivering peace, sustainable peace. An important issue that has been raised here when addressing financing for development. We cannot forget the private sector. We cannot forget the private sector, as has been mentioned by the ambassador of Japan very well. The private sector financing and investment is an important piece of this equation. And this issue of human capital has been also very well stressed by the deputy representative of Italy, Stefano Stefanelli. Thank you very much for your contributions, for your interventions, and for this wonderful debate this Wednesday afternoon. Thank you very much. I wish you the best and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, dear sister. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Congrats, colleagues.
Bye.
Raul, I think we can leave, correct?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Raul, muito obrigada, Raul.
não, obrigado.
Muito obrigada.
Obrigado eu.